Hi, Pam.
Hi, not Tom Higley.
Let's see if I can rename myself.
Hello, good morning.
There we go. Hi.
Oh, let's see, can I do that? Rename. I'm gonna also do the exogenesis fanciness. Copying. All right. I'm renamed now. Cool. It's nice. I don't have to do a lot of like the back end stuff. They're doing it for us.
That is very nice.
Yes. I mean, the DSW 9 or Zoom 9 person, Sabrina, or I think it's Sabrina. They are messaging me saying, hey, I'll bring the attendees or make them panelists or automatic. When you came in, were you automatically on the panel?
Yeah, but it seems like there was a special link
Yeah,
participants got.
which is great that Zoom either figured that out or DSW figured it out, because that was just craziness trying to like dig through the attendees and be like, who is my person?
Yeah.
I had a list here. I was like, okay, Sanjay. So it's, you saw the message that Jenna sent?
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to look through the questions. So I'm just
That's cool. So the questions, I think that after reading through the questions that she wrote, some of them, like, I anticipate that when I ask that one, they would, like, 3 of them would be answered. So I had to kind of, control of your own destiny is kind of the part no one can say no to.
That's exactly right.
We have some attendees here.
Woohoo!
Great. Hello, everyone. I don't know if they can hear us. I think they can. Hi, if you're here. You're listening to us talk about why crazy people decide to become entrepreneurs and kind of stick with it. Why are we doing this?
Why am I doing this?
Because
again?
we're terrible employees. Is that why?
Yep.
Yeah.
Everybody's always trying to hire me, and I'm like, yeah, but you don't know.
But what you secretly don't know is you don't want to do that.
That's right.
You will rue the day.
That's right.
Yeah, it's great. No, it is nice having control of your own destiny. It's funny though, I was mentioning to someone recently a quote that I heard about why entrepreneurship is so hard is because you when you have a boss, when something goes wrong, you can blame your boss. But when you're the boss,
You go, oh,
and something goes wrong, you blame yourself and then have a spiraling existential crisis.
so true. So true.
Anyway, in 30 seconds, Denver Startup Week is going to play a video.
Perfect.
Welcoming us to Denver Startup Week. It's ready to start. Wait, exactly 10, right? DSW Zoom 9? Your name?
I think that might be automatic. There might not be a real person there.
There's a human. Oh, there it is. Okay, we'll be quiet.
Uh-oh.
Oh, sorry, DSW's Zoom 9. When that happens.
We are experiencing technical difficulties. We'll be with you in a moment.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Cynthia. Or we can just tell you about Denver Startup Week. No, they might not like what they might say like, oh, that's not, Denver Startup Week is awesome. Thank you all for being here. Great to see all of you. This will be a great conversation because we have a great panel. I do kind of wish we were all in the same room sometimes, but oh, here we go. All right, Denver Startup Week.
Hello, I'm Eric Matisik, co-chair of Denver Startup Week. Last year, we were able to bring the global audience together for Denver Startup Week, and this year, we're excited to welcome that global audience back as we celebrate and showcase the best of entrepreneurship that the Denver ecosystem in Colorado has to offer, in Denver and beyond. There are lots to explore this week, but most importantly, we're excited that you're joining us. We have nearly 50 sponsor companies who contribute to make Denver Startup Week possible. Let's show our love for these companies today and all week long. Thanks to our headquarters and title sponsor, Amazon, and our title sponsors whose leadership makes this week come to life, Capital One Cafe, the Downtown Denver Partnership, Fluid Truck, Hotel Engine, and WeWork. and our track sponsors who've made all the great content you're hearing today possible, which includes our founder track sponsor, Kickstart, our growth track sponsor, Friday Health Plans, developer track sponsor, Quizlet, product track sponsor, Palantir, design track sponsor, Battery 621 and the Public Works, people track sponsor, Exactly, and the spotlight event sponsor, Strat Labs. Our headline event sponsors are bringing this excitement to the entire week. Thank you to B-Side Fund, Colorado Public Radio, Comcast, Coors Brewing Company, Denver Pavilions, Entrepreneurship at the University of Denver, Gusto, JP Morgan Chase, Method, Moss Adams, Pi Insurance, Promontory Mortgage Path, Red Bull Basement, Southwest, Tattered Cover, and the VF Venture Foundry. Finally, thank you to our sponsors and member sponsors who are listed on the screen, and thank you for your support of Denver Startup Week. Now, let's get to it.
Welcome to this session of Denver Startup Week. I'm Kurt Roberts, a partner at Kickstart Fund. We're on a mission to build great companies in the Wild West by backing the boldest entrepreneurs with capital, community, and expertise for the journey. A lot of venture capitalists happen to invest in Colorado. At Kickstart, we focus on it. We love our Colorado startups, Sondermine, Nomad, Pomp, and Havenly, to name just a few. Because we were among the first seed funds in the region, we know what it's like to start something before others understand the vision, which means we're willing to lead investments in promising teams. We use our experience to grow your startup and recruit top talent. Our portfolio community is filled with visionary founders like you who are committed to moving the whole ecosystem together. It's the network effect in full effect. Raising venture capital is more than swapping shares for money. It's inviting the right investors to complement your team. We hope we'll be your choice for seed funding in the Mountain West, and we hope you enjoy this session.
Hi everyone, welcome to Denver Startup Week. I'm Olivia, the Founder Track Chair and member of the Denver Startup Week Organizing Committee. Before we get started, the Denver Startup Week Organizing Committee acknowledges Indigenous peoples as the original owners of the land on which we reside, which is the traditional territory of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho peoples. We acknowledge the painful history of genocide, ethnic cleansing, stolen land, forced removal, and forced occupation of their territory. And we honor those who have stewarded this land throughout generations and all other Indigenous tribes and nations who call Colorado home. Thank you for joining us for the 10th anniversary of Denver Startup Week. At Denver Startup Week, we strive to make all of our sessions a space where attendees can connect, learn, and grow, regardless of age, gender identity, gender expression, race, ability, sexual orientation, or the combination of those identities. There's something for everyone at DSW, thanks to all of our community members who submitted their best content to make this week what it is. And thank you for joining us. Thank you to our sponsors for their support in helping us to keep DSW free and accessible for all, especially our Founder Track sponsor, Kickstart. With that, please enjoy this session and the entire week ahead.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Or I guess it could be evening because it's virtual, so you could be somewhere else in the world. Welcome. I am very excited to be here with all of you. So this is a really interesting panel and probably unique in a lot of ways compared to some other panels that you've been at, because this panel is talking about a very different phase of the entrepreneurial journey. Most of the panels that you're probably seeing talk about what happens after a company is started, when there's a company that exists. But actually, a lot happens, of course, before there's ever a company. So this amazing panel that we have here today, who will introduce themselves in a moment, will really focus the conversation on what the discovery and validation phases are like in entrepreneurship. And we'll just have candid conversation and lots of learnings, just soaking up the knowledge of the folks on this panel. Before we get started, I'll introduce myself really quickly. My name is Pam Narowski. I'm the VP of Programs at XGenesis, a startup studio. We are focused on tackling or helping entrepreneurs discover opportunities within wicked problems and helping them tackle those. So I am definitely familiar with this stage of the journey because I'm with entrepreneurs in it lots of times and have been kind of in the startup studio space for a while now. With that, I'll go ahead and have our panel introduce themselves. Cynthia, could you start us off?
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm excited to be here with y'all today. My name is Cynthia Delaria, and I am a serial entrepreneur, sometimes startup, junkie. And I'm on, as we were talking about, my 6th startup now. And my passion is entrepreneurs, particularly early stage, and finding ways to help entrepreneurs have their vision and their passion be expressed in the world without wasting time and money on things that aren't ever going to turn into a profitable company. There's nothing that kills entrepreneurial spirit like big, huge falling flat on your face failure. So we try and avoid that as much as possible. So I'm thrilled to be here today to talk about this. It's going to be really fun.
Great, Cynthia. Thank you so much. All right, Carlin.
So good to be here. Thanks for sitting in with us, everyone. I am co-founder and chief operating officer of XGenesis. I've spent really my entire career in the startup space. We were just talking before the panel started about the inability to work for other people, and I think that's what drives some of us to be entrepreneurs. And for me, this topic is incredibly near and dear to my heart because I've been in this phase many times over, just like I'm sure Cynthia has, of one thing is done and what's next, and how the hell do you get from absolutely nothing to a new venture that can be productive, do something good in the world, be financially successful, et cetera, et cetera. So this is something I think about every day in working with our entrepreneurs. Really glad to be a part of this conversation.
All right. Thank you, Carlin. Sanjay, let's hear from you. So great to see you. And you're muted, by the way.
Hey, nice to see everyone. I like to say I'm a parallel social entrepreneur because one is not enough for me. And it's I just go with how my brain works, right? It's very important to accept who you are. So that's me, parallel social entrepreneur. I am running 2 public benefit corporations. One is called IGAL, enabling financial inclusion for the unbanked in Mexico and potentially in Native American lands, and Konbit, which is enabling food sovereignty in Native American lands. I like what Colin said about the inability to work for others. That is something I've seriously struggled with my entire career. You can see all the gray in my gray hair. It's all to do with that. Yeah, I'm excited to be here and share possibilities of what can come about in this world that we want to build.
Thank you.
World we want to have and
Yes.
businesses we want to build.
Love it. It's perfect. All right, Jenna.
I'm not technically on the panel, but I'm here for moral support. I will turn off my video and mute myself. And of course, if any of the panelists need anything, please feel free to message me, and I'll moderate chat a little bit as well too. My name is Jenna Santi, and I am the Director of Research for XGenesis. So I know all these people pretty well. And a lot of what I do is help to uncover opportunity, or at least lay out a buffet of potential opportunities for others, hopefully to capitalize on. So I have a little experience in that area. And if there's something I can say to elaborate on that or jump in later, Pam, I'll leave that to you, but I'll be here in the background in a non-creepy way for the rest of the panel.
Thank you, Dr. Jenna Santi. She's one of the brilliant members of our team. So I will probably be throwing questions your way because I kind of know what's going on in there, and yeah, hopefully can access that. And Olivia, thank you for joining. And I would love to hear from you if you'll introduce yourself.
Sure. I apologize, everyone. I had an emergency at 10 trying to get another session going and started.
We saw you on the video at the beginning, so we know like you're making all of this happen behind the scenes. So thank you. Founder track Olivia.
Yeah,
Anyway, yeah.
with a huge team that is making all this happen. But my name's Olivia Omega. I'm the founder track chair of Denver Startup Week. And this is my 4th year leading up the founder track. And I'm also an entrepreneur, founder of Wallace Marketing Group, 20 years of branding and marketing experience, and just excited to be on this panel and supporting everyone here. Thanks again.
All right, welcome Olivia, and thank you. And for those of you who are kind of joining a little bit later, I just want to point out a couple of different quick things. First of all, I mentioned before that this panel is going to focus on a different part of the entrepreneurial journey. This is before you've started a company. So this is really focused on the discovery and validation phase of the journey, which arguably is almost the most important part of the journey. And everyone is, well, at least the people on the panel are nodding vigorously.
Not arguably, it is.
It is. Okay, cool. Yeah, I got a +1. That's great. So also I want to invite you, if you've been on this Zoom panel type of, environment before the webinar format, know that you can use the chat. I just want to point out, this is like a UX Zoom thing. Make sure that you're writing to panelists and attendees whenever you're writing in the chat and you'd like everybody to see it, because otherwise you end up just chatting with just the panel who are focused on kind of answering and talking. So yeah, go ahead and do that. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your questions, and I'll try to integrate them into the conversation. So also panelists, I just wanted to point out that I'd really like for you, when you feel inclined to answer a question, to go ahead and just jump on in. If you're kind of feeling like, that might not be something I have a lot to contribute to, that's cool too. So I'm just going to focus on throwing the questions out there and you just step on in. We'll try to keep question and answer times to about 2-3 minutes. So just kind of think about that mental clock in your head. All right. So I mentioned before, and you've heard the intros from this panelist, that this is really focused on the discovery and validation part of the journey. What I would love to hear from all of you about is what that part of the journey has been like for you, if you've experienced it, or this is, and or question, if you've been a person who's really facilitated that part of the journey for other entrepreneurs, what have you seen that to look like? So I will throw that out, and I would love for someone to jump in and tell us more.
Yeah, I'll kick it off because I've both been there myself and as a startup advisor and coach and mentor for many, many, many years. I've worked with a lot of people who kind of want to be entrepreneurs, but they're like, I'd love to do a startup, but I don't know where I would start. And, the thing about being in this phase is I feel like even if you have an idea already, you should go through the phase of talking to potential customers and understanding what it is that their problems really are and how they really relate to them. But if you're wondering, how do I find a really good idea? Go out and find a big problem and then figure out how to solve it. And finding a big problem, you can do that by talking to people. Like, who are the kind of people who you'd love to be able to make their life better, or a group of people who there's something that technology might be able to solve for them. Go find out what their biggest problem is and figure out a way to build something. I do tech startups, which is why I say technology, but figure out a way to build something that solves that biggest problem. And there's a business there. There's always a business in solving people's problems. So that's where I always start, 100%.
I love that quote. There's always a business in solving people's problems. That's great.
And I think that, just what Cynthia said, of there's always a business in solving people's problems. I feel like in my history and working with entrepreneurs, that's where a lot of it stems from. They're solving their own problems. I did a lot of work with women entrepreneurs, particularly moms who were leaving corporate because they had this new baby and a toddler to raise, and finding gaps in the product space or gaps in services for those moms. And they weren't supported. And so they created it themselves, solving their own problems.
Yeah, I want to expand on that and say, first and foremost, start with empathy. Human-centered design is super critical. It's not just a buzzword. You gotta put yourself in the shoes of other people, their problems, especially if you're talking large, wicked problems. It could be a problem you're trying to solve in Africa or in Asia or Native American lands, as we are doing. You gotta go talk to the people, start with empathy. And interesting thing is I've been working with Buckminster Fuller Institute. They use the term trim tab, which is like, it's literally this little piece at the back of the ship. It just moves a little and the whole ship moves. So, and it's also on the planes when the plane moves. It's very important to think about what little thing that you can do to overcome all the barriers that would be there. And there will be a lot of constraints you have to work with. So keep that all in mind as you go through the discovery process. And I like to say the invalidation process.
Yes.
Talk to as many people and say, why will this fail? You know? And
I love that. I love that
super
you said
critical.
it's tiny, right? Because sometimes, like, people try and take on the whole world of this whole thing and this whole company. I'm going to build this whole big, and it's like, what's the smallest slice that actually provides value to user one, day one, right? I love that you said that.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, I'll say that for me, the moments of in between, the moments of finishing one thing and before the next thing, it's sort of this magical period, but can also feel like limbo. So it's sort of this combination of nerve-wracking, exciting, open field of possibilities. And I think from my own experience of those periods, the more that I'm actually able to relax into them and slow down, actually the better. And sometimes I found there can be sort of a rush of like, okay, what's the next thing? I need the next thing. And especially for entrepreneurs who tend to be incredibly productivity oriented and wanting to make stuff happen, that slowing down can actually be pretty challenging. And yet when I am able to slow down, and when I have been able to slow down and stay in that space, not rush to get out of it, but actually really sort of milk it and enjoy it and discover, explore, sort of use that period to its fullest effect. That's when really it's been the most productive actually in the end.
Carlin, tied to what you said, I think it's super critical for people in the context of not rushing is divergent thinking. You want to have as many ideas fall into that bucket. And as part of it, you need to relax into it and not jump to the conclusion, I'm going to converge and go down a path, because that might be the completely wrong path you're going after. There would be a point you get to that. You may have multiple hypotheses you work with. Let's say you get 100 ideas, out of them you take 5 and say, okay, I'm going to try to explore this 5, and then the 5 might become 1. The rush that tends to happen with the startup is like, without going through that process, people have jumped to the 1, and saying, yep, this is the one that is going to change the world. It's going to make me a millionaire, whatever their need is, or want is in the world. So it's very important to step back. So you're spot on that point, Carlin. Very important.
This is sort of a strange analogy, but for those of you who are into attachment theory, entrepreneurs almost have like a really anxious attachment style when it comes to ideas. It's like, oh, this is the one, and it can be so easy to fall in love with it and like that, and it's got to be that thing or nothing else. And actually, the more kind of secure attachment to ideas is, oh, okay, that one's interesting, but I can take space, and what's over here, and what's over here, and that can definitely take a little bit of sort of conscious intention to not just go with that first thing that sort of love at first sight.
Yeah, I think that's very true, and that can be very dangerous in falling in love with one idea and pressing through no matter what the validation says or lack of validation, for example. And so sometimes I'll talk about this is when Carlin brought up analogies. I'm like, I love analogies, and they're usually pretty bad ones, but one is thinking about a parking garage or a parking lot. And so this idea, it doesn't have to say I have to throw it away or I'm never going to do this idea, but can we put it in the parking garage? You've got lots of cars in there, lots of options to drive based on the environment, based on the needs of today, and being smart about which car you take out to drive, based on the data out there, based on the validation that's being put forth.
Carlin, I was wondering if this morning you went to a Zen talk or maybe did your meditation that you're talking about detachment.
I'm steeped in it. I love geeking out about that kind of thing.
Well, it's such a perfect analogy or a perfect concept to bring into this phase of the journey, because it's kind of interesting. So I've mentioned to people I have a 9-month-old baby, and one of the things we talk about a lot is attachment theory and how to create secure attachment. And in how many ways do people call their company their baby? And it's very true. You can create these really unhealthy attachments to ideas. You can, I've heard people like start to talk about an idea in the discovery phase, and they're like buying websites, domains, and naming it before they've ever
And hiring developers.
And the biggest thing is they're wasting time, effort, energy, money before they've actually really saturated in validation. So as the moderator, I want to just kind of summarize a couple of different things that everyone said. One of the things that kind of came up here was the idea of like having openness in the discovery phase of the journey, a lot of openness to new things, to taking those things, putting them in the parking lot, taking that car out, driving it around for a test drive, putting it back in the parking lot, seeing what happens, because sometimes an idea is great, but it's not the right time for that idea. But it's okay. It's in the parking lot for when it is the right time. Another thing that kind of came up that I think is such a key part, saturating in the joy of that moment in time, which is super unique. That discovery phase is so unique, because how many other times are you able in your life to just sit there and say, there's so many possibilities of what I could create in the world. What might that look like? So yeah, those are just a couple quick things. So I want to pose another question to the group. What are some of the personal challenges that you've seen or faced during the discovery part of the journey? So we kind of leaned into like the joy of it, what should happen, but what are some of the challenges of this place?
I think, one of the biggest challenges that pops straight into my head is the potential loneliness and isolation of that phase. Discovery doesn't have to be a solo process, but I think for a lot of entrepreneurs, it is, because you're trying to really understand what this is. Is there a market? How do you talk about this? And you don't want to involve a ton of people because you're still so unsure of what this is. What does it do? How do you talk about it? So I think that's one thing as entrepreneurs, we do ourselves a disservice by kind of staying on this island alone, trying to figure these things out versus reaching out to resources, other entrepreneurs who have gone through that process. And something that has come up repeatedly throughout Denver Startup Week, from Monday at our kickoff breakfast to we had a founders reception yesterday, is how Denver, compared to other startup cities, and I've only experienced Denver as a startup city, so I personally don't have the experience, but when you go to other startup cities, you talk about Silicon Valley, New York, Detroit, Atlanta, et cetera, that Denver is the most collaborative and welcoming city for entrepreneurs to reach out to other entrepreneurs, even in their same industry, to get guidance and support. So it's exciting to hear.
Yeah, just to expand on the loneliness, I would say for all those people who get excited about entrepreneurship, I would say entrepreneurship is a pretty lonely task. So you need to surround yourself as you build out your team with the right kind of people, but also don't be afraid to actually share some of the challenges that you go through, either with your partners, or even having a coach is a very worthwhile thing because it's pretty lonely. So having sort of building a sort of a group, or having the camaraderie with other founders, and also having a coach is something I would definitely suggest, going even beyond the discovery and validation phase.
Great best practice. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I would say that, we kind of talked about it a little bit, but we as entrepreneurs, we're generally people, and particularly if you're in tech or if you're talking to venture capitalists or people who want to give you money, there's this perception that you have to go fast. Like, we got to get the things so that we can do the stuff so that we can make our 10x in 5 years, or like all this ridiculous conversation that we have around building a startup. You have to set that aside. Like, going fast. And I deal with this all the time because I'm on my 6th startup. I've been doing this for 25 years. Like, I know all the things, right? No, every single startup. I'm a year into my current one, and I'm having again that realization that if I push too fast, that will guarantee the death of this thing that I'm trying to get into the world. And so one of the biggest challenges is being able to shut out all of that driven feedback that you're going to hear, and be true to you and the mission and the customer, the person whose problem you're trying to solve. To Carlin's point, if you want to get attached and fall in love with anything, fall in love with your customer, because you'll always end up building a business that actually solves a problem for them if you do that, right? But you have to shut out the noise, and you have to shut out the like, do it now, do it now, do it now. Tech is changing. Somebody's going to come in and do this before you. Like, you can't live in that space. You have to trust the journey, and you have to trust your intuition and the research and the validation that you're doing, that the right idea at the right time, you can execute on it. And even if somebody gets there before you, or, whatever your fear is that might happen, if you're doing the right things and you're serving the right people and you're doing it in the right ways, you will be successful. You'll do it better than the people who came out before you, or you do it cheaper than they will, or there will be some competitive advantage that you'll have because you took that time and you understood your customer really well.
I feel like piggybacking on that, because I actually think there's something incredibly subversive in a good way, Cynthia, about telling people to slow down in an ecosystem that puts a massive premium on moving quickly.
Go fast, go fast, go fast.
So I like that, and I think moving slow and really taking the time to craft something is undervalued as a whole in the startup ecosystem. We at XGenesis, we sometimes talk about moving fast and moving slow, and so it's not that you should never move fast, but it's to know when to move fast and when to slow down. And actually, if you can have both of those in your tool belt, that's kind of the best circumstance.
That's exactly right. I love that.
And then I also, Olivia, I just really like that you brought up the loneliness piece. I mean, I think that's just so prevalent. And there too, I actually think that kind of internal processing, it's essential, right? Because as much as what is the idea, when we're exploring something new, there's also this question that you can't help but bump up against, which is, who am I? And it pops up over and over again. It's like, what do I care about? What do I value? What do I want to be in the world? What do I want to create? And you almost have to be internal in moments to really reflect on that. But then if you're not also then going out and getting outside of that box and having conversation after conversation after conversation, then it can be really easy to kind of wallow in that and to get stuck. So I just really appreciate kind of this fast and slow aspect, and the internal, external, and especially in that discovery phase, having access to both of those ends of the spectrum in those different cases is just incredibly important.
One thing I want to add is really quickly, Pam, is we talk about analogs, right? Analogies, but I think it's also important antilogs. What you don't want to do that others are doing, So for example, the pace thing we're talking about is something probably very prevalent in Silicon Valley. Denver is much more laid back. Let's live our Colorado way. So what you don't want to do, what you don't want to replicate. It's very important to think about both analogs and antilogs in this discovery phase as well, because there's a lot to be learned by the wrongs that other people have done. So I want to.
And to your point, it's not an accident that the whole concept of trough of sorrows, which if you've never heard that, this is like those periods that you go through as an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
That term came out of Silicon Valley for a reason. Their drive and that is part of what creates the loneliness, because you're like, I can't tell anybody about this because I'm not really ready. So it creates just this like kind of thing that happens inside of you.
That's such a great point. And it's interesting because one of the things that came up for me that I wanted to point out in kind of my summary of this discussion was when Olivia brought up the idea of loneliness. To combat loneliness, it takes vulnerability. So you have to say, I'm going to be vulnerable enough to say, this is something that's really hard. But here's the thing, everyone who's out there, all of our attendees and all of this panel, you're hearing loud and clear that everybody gets it in this ecosystem. And you're hearing loud and clear that in the Denver community, especially Denver, Boulder, and Colorado, this is the type of community where you can reach out on LinkedIn cold and say, look, I am having a hard time processing this idea that I have. Would you be open to jumping on a 10-minute call? Or could we grab coffee and talk about this? And the reality is someone has probably done that for them and they're likely to say yes. I can't even tell you the people who have said yes to me in this ecosystem to a coffee or whatever it might be. And it just ends up creating this community. And that's what we're also lucky to be a part of here. So be vulnerable, get out there and talk to people and really be intentional about combating the loneliness. So I think that that's kind of a summary. It also, what Carlin brought up around moving fast and slow, kind of the concept, if anyone's like a musician, tempo guisto, which is the idea of the right pace at the right time. You feel that in music. It's just like that in the stance of entrepreneurship. But one thing that's interesting about that, you'll notice, moving fast and slow, you're still moving. You're always moving forward. And that's something that actually, I think it was Ethan Austin who works at Techstars. He mentioned this in a LinkedIn post recently. He's like, I want to, and I'm misquoting him a little bit, but just, he basically said, I look at the companies where they're running, they're going, they're trying to do things, they're getting out there. Even if you're feeling stuck, just keep moving through whatever pace that might be at that time. So anyway, that's discovery, right? You're saturating in ambiguity and it isn't easy. And, but you're still, really, you're there and it's such an important part of the journey. I'm curious to give a little bit more tangible best practices to this audience. Are there tools that you've used in the discovery phase that have been helpful for you? Ted has a question here and it's related to this. So how do you avoid analysis paralysis during the discovery and validation phase? That's his question. So yeah, give us some tools, panel. How do you help with that ambiguity and analysis paralysis during that process?
So we do a process in my startup program, and we're building it into the SaaS platform that we're building to help entrepreneurs with this very thing. And we call it the blue sky. And I do it with a whiteboard and sticky notes. Like literally it's that low fidelity, because what it allows you to do is just start writing out all the different thoughts that are in your head, get it all out onto paper and look at it in a way where then you can start to say, well, these two things might be related in some way. And these two things might be related in some way, or this is that's a really bonkers thing. I have no idea what I would do with that, but I don't want to lose track of it. Right. And I'm always going to go back to the customer and what's the problem you're solving. Once you have it laid out, then you can say, well, what problem does this solve? And who are the types of people who would be having that problem, who that solution could solve that problem for? Let me go talk to some people that look like them. And you gather some data and you set that aside with that idea. And then you move on to the next one. And at some point, some passion is going to emerge in you. Analysis paralysis is just that you haven't either dug deep enough into anything to know whether or not you connect to it, or you just haven't gotten it all out on paper so that you can see it and realize the thing that you connect to. That's the process that we use, and it works beautifully every time that we do it. And it just takes being intentional and really the minute you think, okay, I've gotten it all out, go, but have I really? And make yourself write 6 more stickies and see what happens.
Yeah, I can start off with my collection.
Yep, I've got them all over, all over my office.
Love it.
Talking about tools, of course, if you want to do it electronically, there is Mural as well as Miro that enables you to do the same thing, especially in this hybrid world we live in. I do want to give a shout out to what the Exgenesis folks have done as part of the founder opportunity fit is what I call Ikigai. The reason for being super critical for all of us to figure out what you love, what you're passionate about, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what will make money. That intersection point is what you're looking for. As a entrepreneur, that's very important, that you should be not looking at only one of the angles. Look at it holistically. I also like to say, in the context of the discovery and validation, I like to think of a triad of economic viability, technical and operational feasibility, and customer desirability. Super critical. Again, it's like a Venn diagram. All of that will lead you to potentially a sustainable business model. So keeping those in mind are super critical during the discovery and validation phase.
And I'll just drop in real quickly around the analysis paralysis point. Something that I've personally found and have seen is making sure that you're setting these 30, 60, 90-day goals that are a little bit bigger. And so I might get into analysis paralysis during that validation, that discovery phase. But if I know in 90 days, I either need to hit the kill switch or move forward to that next stage or put the car back in the parking lot, then that helps me to get to a place where I know I have to make a decision at X, Y, and Z point, versus just prolonging and a year has gone by and I have done nothing. The other thing that helps with that is making sure that you have some accountability in place there. And so that can be with, again, with what Xgenesis is doing, any other group, incubator, accelerator, where you've got a group of people who are wanting to know what are your goals, what are you going to do in 90 days, and checking in on you to make sure that you are actually making some progress and making those decisions.
I'll add in a couple extra tools and just seconding what all the others have said. Just on the more general side, I think diverge, converge is an incredibly simple framework that's really powerful. So it's like with the sticky note model or in Mural or some other tool, there are always going to be phases where you're just getting everything out there, right? It's ideas, it's variations, it's what could be, what should be, it's everything, right? You're throwing spaghetti at the wall. If that's all you're doing, it's going to be really hard to actually then iterate and get closer to a single direction. So in diverge, converge, the key is to recognize when you've been in one of those for a while. So it's like, okay, I think I've been diverging for a while. I've been throwing a bunch of stuff at the wall. It's time to narrow it down. Sticky note wise, maybe you have a ton of sticky notes on the wall. You start to group them, you're clustering them, right? It's called deduplicating. You're saying, okay, this one goes with this one goes with this one. Okay, there's themes. All right, now how am I going to select these? What are my criteria? And the model that Sanjay mentioned is a great one for that. So which of these do I think is the best fit for me or who I am, for what's good in the world, for what can be financially successful? But by the way, we didn't develop Ikigai. Ikigai is a concept that's been out in the world for a while. But we've definitely adapted and made a lot of use of it. I'll also mention we developed something called the opportunity canvas, which is like the lean canvas, but for discovery phase. So it's a similar canvas where it has some boxes that you can fill out and very quickly use and iterate on, but it's designed for this part of the entrepreneur's journey. That's something we share out publicly, so we're happy to find a way to share that out and maybe post a link to it.
Thank you. All of these great resources. Sanjay, you were gonna.
Yeah, I just want to about slowing down. There are days when you feel, gosh, I should have accomplished X, Y, and Z, either in the 30, 60, 90 or day in the life of an entrepreneur. Hey, I was scheduled to finish all of these activities, and you fail. Which is pretty normal because you're trying to do a lot. One of the things in terms of slowing down, I'm trying to do as a practice is writing haiku, because that is something that resonates with me personally. And I fail. Don't get me wrong. I try to tell myself, hey, write at least one per day, be more observing of the world, what's going around you. And it's like, again, you pick yourself up. You don't give yourself a bad rap for having failed to write. Similarly, if you drop certain things that we're scheduled for doing today, it's okay, it'll happen tomorrow. Most important, I think, is the slowing down aspect that we somehow discount too much in our crazy world these days.
Yeah, it's actually a really good point, which is as entrepreneurs, we forget the rules of the game were made up by us, right? Like you're the one that said, this is what needs to get done in this time frame. And that's not about like giving yourself a way out, but it's a way of saying, okay, I'm recalibrating what I'm actually capable of in a given time frame, or what really fits into what I'm trying to create. This is not an opportunity to beat myself up because my 90 days came and went and I didn't do all the things that I said. It's like, why did I overcommit myself? What am I doing that's more important than this right now? Is it really more important? Or am I prioritizing things that aren't more important to me? Am I deprioritizing things that are more important because I think I should get all of this done because I said I'm going to? You gave your word, but you made it up. So you have to be willing as an entrepreneur to learn from what you've been given data to learn from, and adjust what you say you can do or what you're committing to, right? You made up the rules of the game. Don't forget that and beat yourself up because you didn't do the game the way you said you should.
Yeah,
right. This is why we're entrepreneurs, because we can't work for other people who tell us how we're supposed to do it.
Yep, I love that. Throw it out the window and start afresh if you need to on your priority. Right. That's great. So another quick thing I'll say, kind of jumping on the panel side of things, is one thing that's always was really helpful for me and still is, and this might be helpful for other people, even not entrepreneurs, is creating structure in your day so that you don't get too lost. A lot of the things that we're talking about are creating structure over those longer periods, 30, 60, 90 days. But what are the implications of those 30 days? And what does that mean for your everyday? Some people, they are so disciplined and structured, they will sit down at their desk and make sure that they get all the things done. I know for me, it was always helpful to say, okay, every day I'm going to start with this practice. Sanjay mentioned his practice of writing a haiku, just getting into that creative flow. So what are the things that get you into that state of flow, and how do you facilitate that with creating a little bit of structure in your day? So yeah, that's just another thing that people have probably had to do during COVID, especially because you don't have the structure of saying, oh, at 10 a.m. I'm in the office, or whatever it might be. So we are about 15 minutes left, and we kind of talked about the very ambiguous stage of discovery. I'm going to put a bit of a definition between discovery and validation and say, and these are different for different people, but, let's say that discovery is the place where you have, spaghetti on the wall and you're just starting to put things together. And the validation phase, you think you have something. There's reason to believe from various sources or the conversations you've had or whatever you might have put together that you might have something. So at this stage of validating that idea, if the folks in the panel could kind of talk me through what your experience has been like during this phase of the journey, and we'll get the conversation started about what's validation phase all about. Go ahead.
Yeah. So for me, again, I always bring it back to this. The validation phase is about what's the problem you're solving? Who are you solving it for? And will they change their habits and spend money in order to have that problem solved in the way that you're proposing to solve it? And the only way you're going to find out the answer to that is to talk to people. And a lot of times the objection that I get when we start working through designing customer validation interviews and what kind of questions do we ask that remove bias and all that kind of stuff, right, is, well, but if I tell a bunch of people what I'm doing, or if I talk about what I'm doing, then somebody's going to steal my idea. Here's the hint about customer validation. It's not about you or your idea. It's about them and their problem. And if you're giving them enough context that somebody in that space could even go do what you're trying to do, you're talking about you more than you're listening to them talk about their problem. And so for me, validation is about listening. When I'm doing a customer validation interview, I talk for the first 2 minutes to give them the logistics and tell them this will be the easiest interview you do probably in your whole life, because you just get to tell me about you and your life. And then I shut up. Right? So understanding that validation is about listening more than it is about talking. And that's why getting it all out actually will help you be a better listener, because you won't have stuff rolling around in your head that you're trying to bounce off everybody you're talking to all the time. So start with the customer. That's my piece.
I love that. And I think for me, it's in my head, it's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer that, oh, you have to talk to customers. And then I get really surprised when I talk to people and I'm like, how many customers have you talked to, or potential customers? And they say, oh, I didn't even think about doing that. And I'm like, what? Oh,
I know.
But I think for me, it was, so back in my 20s, I had the opportunity to work at a really great agency where the focus was brand positioning and qualitative and quantitative research. And that's all I did for 2 straight years of focus groups and online surveys. And back in the day when there wasn't as many tools as we have today. But I remember one project I was on, which left an impression on me. And I know that, Pam and Carlin work with wicked problems and really changing the world. And I'm going to talk about baked beans for a second here, but it was a baked beans project. And it was back when Bush baked beans took over the American market. They were, had 80% market share and all of these things. And Heinz wasn't really in the US market, but they were all over in the UK and dominated the UK. And so the project I got to work on was a 6-month validation project to see can Heinz, can a brand from the UK come into the US market and disrupt it and take market share from Bush baked beans. And so after months of this research, I ate so many baked beans. It was really qualitative, quantitative, all of this research, they finally figured out that it was not going to be as successful as they planned, that they weren't going to make as much money, but they spent a good chunk of time and money getting to that, that aha moment. And so from literally my early 20s to today, validation is such a no-brainer. So I think the education around that and just reminding entrepreneurs and founders that this is an incredible step to not only save you money, but to save you energy and time. Again, I just go back to people need to even know about, what is this validation? Why is it even important?
Yes.
So just to be clear, in the X-Genesis framework, validation comes before venture launches, and that's important. Right. So not that it stops when a venture launches, but there's an extensive validation process that we see as being essential to determining whether a venture should exist in the world at all. And just to echo what everybody else said, if you're not having dozens of conversations with people, you're doing it wrong. You have to get outside of your black box. And you have to be willing, to Sanjay's earlier point, to look for the evidence that's contrary to your hypothesis, to almost try to disprove yourself. And if you fail to disprove yourself, despite trying really, really hard, you might be onto something.
That's great. So definitely the theme of talking to customers has come up in a resounding, you must talk to people. Here's what I would love, because I'll tell you what, I have experienced the opposite of this being done well many times. I don't know if anyone else has.
Yeah.
Let's talk about best practices for having those conversations, for invalidating. Let's call it invalidating your idea, not validating. Let's talk about best practices and like what you should not do during those conversations and what you should definitely do during those conversations. Also, after you've had those conversations, I'd love to talk about what people do with them, because many times people have them and then it's like lots of information, incredibly valuable, and it's floating out in oblivion or just sitting in a Google Doc. So tell me all the things, panel.
Yeah, I think the key to doing it right is remove your bias. If you are interjecting words, if you are asking questions that are leading questions, questions in customer validation that are like, do you find it more difficult to one thing or another? You've immediately put into their mind difficulty, and you've also given them a cue that tells them what's going to please you and how to make you happy in their response. people want to be connected to each other. So what you have to do is you have to create a space where creating connection for them is actually sharing their experience. And that's why I say listening, but also the way you ask questions, you got to remove the bias. And if you have to introduce a word, asking them the question, when I say that, what does that word mean to you? Because you're level setting again. You're saying, I'm interjecting this word because I don't have any other good way of communicating what I'm trying to ask, but I want you to tell me, what does that mean to you? So that's the piece about like how you do it right. How you do it wrong: interject all the bias that you can possibly think of, introduce all the terms, ask them very specific things that are leading questions. All you're going to get back is confirmation bias, and you're not going to get really good data.
I think something that in doing it wrong and building on that, Cynthia, is getting defensive with the response and taking it personally. This is not a personal attack on you. This isn't an attack on your intelligence.
Nope.
And so really separating yourself from your baby and not taking it personally.
I love that.
So great. Bringing it back to the attachment. Yep.
Yeah.
Anything else for folks to add about best practices with customer discovery?
I think in the data piece, because you asked, like, you know, now I have all this data, what do you do with it? I like to write things on paper, and I thought I had one right here. It used to be right here, but I don't. But what I like to do is I will go back through the data. I transcribe. So I record every conversation that I have, and then I'll throw it through a transcription engine. And then I will go back through it and I will pull out words, phrases, concepts that come up consistently. And I do almost this mind mapping, and I look for areas where there's consistency in what people are saying or the things that they're expressing. Now, there's also another piece that comes out of this, which is when you're building user personas out of the validation that you've done, marketing language that uses the words and phrases from the mouth of your customers is much more likely to resonate with more people and get you sales when you are ready to start selling. Grab those quotes and those phrases that are really juicy, where it's like you can feel like when you hear somebody say it, you go, oh, like I can just feel like the weight of that, right? Like it's visceral, and it creates a story, and it's in their words. Sometimes you'll hear the exact same complaints come out of 35 or 40 people's mouths, and you go, man, there's the problem I'm solving right there. And maybe that will shift the direction of where you thought you were going or what you thought you were building. But again, that's the point of this. Discovery and validation very much go hand in hand, because you start with some hypotheses, or you start with some ideas, you gather some research, you do some research, gather some data, do some validation, and then you pivot a little bit here or there. And I can promise you it is so much cheaper and so much easier to pivot at this point in the game than it is when you've got an app out there and you are like looking for a market. Believe me, I've talked to those people too, and it's so much more expensive. So do it now and look for those trends and look for those patterns. That's what you're looking for.
I love that.
These days, as part of the validation, if you need to, don't be afraid of paper, as you rightly said, sketch it out, show it to people, invalidate it, see if it resonates with people or not. And there is plenty of tools there to now very quickly hack something that looks like almost like a real app, because everything these days is app, Do you have app for that, So it's very easy to do that these days. So the cost of doing that is low earlier on. So totally resonate with me as well, Cynthia, what you said.
And just to highlight what Sanjay said, there's a progression to this. So you're starting with very, very problem-focused interviews, right? Where you're not potentially talking about a solution at all. You might have an idea, but initially you're really focusing on understanding the customer and the problem, and looking for the ways that might or might not connect to the solution you conceive. As that's borne out, or you fail to invalidate that particular problem, then you might progress towards more solution-oriented interviews and mock-ups and more kind of user experience type interactions. And couldn't agree more. It's like, this is the cheapest time. For every change you make here, you're saving thousands of potential hours down the road that you could have wasted.
And tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Of your money and other people's money.
That's right.
So one quick thing, and your reputation, lots of things, right? So another quick tool that I found really helpful is the book, The Mom Test, because it's not just about the conversations that you're having, it's about who you're having them with. So like, it's great if you have a really supportive family or you have a really supportive ecosystem and you have cheerleaders. You're going to need your cheerleaders. Trust me, like you will be able to leverage them later. Your customer discovery calls are not the time to talk to people, like Cynthia mentioned, that are going to try to make you feel good about, you know, the idea. What you want is for people to invalidate. So really be intentional about who you're having the conversations with. And one other quick thing that I wrote down as just a note is the idea that you might invalidate during your customer calls that this is your customer. They might be telling you about a different customer and you might have to switch gears and like switch up who all your calls are with. And that's okay. That's great. I know we only have 3 minutes here. I definitely open up the floor, of course, to questions, as I've mentioned before, but I also wanted to thank the panel and would love for all of you to just share, you know, if there's anything that's kind of been coming up for you repeatedly during this conversation, if you could just give me like that 30-second synopsis of like, if there's one thing you take from this conversation, please take this. So go ahead.
If there's one thing you take from this conversation, validate, talk to customers before you build anything. If that will save you thousands of hours of time, decades of time, hundreds of thousands of dollars. I can't tell you the number of times I hear the story of the person who spent 5 years of their life, $500,000 of their own or somebody else's money, and now they're a product looking for a market. And that is never you never have to be in that situation. If you will do this process, you can avoid that 100% of the time.
No, one thing I will take away from this is our initial kind of mention into conversation around attachment theory and really making sure that you are detaching yourself personally from the outcome so that you can truly validate and not get caught up in your feelings and emotions, which we all do. We're all human. But that's my biggest piece of advice.
Expanding on that, I would say slow down. It's good for you. It's good for the world as well. There's no need to rush anything.
And just to jump on that, there was a good question in the chat at one point about, you know, what about lean methodology and all of that? That's about like doing very rapid cycles. And for me, it's not inconsistent at all. So I think slowing down is about going the right direction. Moving fast is about making progress in that direction. And you can move incredibly fast, but if you're not going the right direction, it doesn't matter. And the only way to make that sure sometimes is to really slow down and ask, okay, am I still aligned with this? Does this still make sense for me? Sometimes that gets left out of the lean cycle, right? What about the entrepreneur? Do I still care about this thing? Or has it gone in a direction that I actually no longer feel connected to or passionate about? So
that's great. All right. Well, I've learned a ton during this conversation. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to be here with us, all of you attendees and panelists. You rocked it. You're amazing. I really wish I would have watched this panel before I started a company years ago. So hopefully all of you took good things away from this. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pam.
Enjoy
Thanks,
Denver
guys.
Startup Week. It's amazing. Cheers.
Bye.